Thank you for joining us on the webinar. My name is Sarah Mayberry, and I'm here with my colleague Meg Netto from the Breathe Easy Coalition. We're excited to talk to you today about implementing successful smoke-free housing policies. Just to give you a little bit of background as we move into the webinar, we want to talk about who the Breathe Easy Coalition is. BEC works to reduce exposure to secondhand smoke through the development of strong voluntary policies that lead to reduced tobacco use and increased tobacco-free living across Maine. The coalition works in 4 key environments: behavioral health facilities, colleges and universities, hospitals, and what we're talking about today, which is multi-unit housing. And the coalition work is made possible with support and funding from the Maine CDC's Partnership for Tobacco-Free Maine. I want to give you a little bit of background of what we're going to talk about on today's session. On our webinar, we're going to give a little bit of background for the case for smoke-free housing, discuss emerging issues that are coming out that affect smoke-free housing policies and are oftentimes what we're hearing for more information from property managers and owners. Then we're going to talk about steps for policy adoption and how to potentially include those emerging issues, talk about resources available from the coalition, and then open it up to any questions and discussion. Just to give you a few logistics about the webinar before we jump right in, all participants are going to be muted throughout the presentation. We'll be answering questions at the end of the webinar, but we don't want you to lose those burning questions as they come up, so make sure that you log it in at any time by entering it into the question box in the GoToWebinar taskbar. Also, we will be recording the webinar, and that it'll be archived on the Breathe Easy Coalition YouTube channel, youtube.com/sfhousing within a week, and we'll send out an announcement to all participants on today's webinar so that you can have that information. So just to jump into it, where we want to give some information on background on smoke-free housing and providing insight as to what's happening in the state of Maine already. We're really excited that smoke-free housing is quickly becoming the norm rather than the exception in the state of Maine. And we're going to give some background for that, but want to set the stage with some data. Maine's smoke-free housing policy status is actually one of the best in the country at this point. We're lucky to say that Maine landlords have really taken some proactive steps in addressing this. That we've seen 100% of Maine public housing authorities go smoke-free, and additionally, in surveys that we did in both 2011 and 2014, we learned about what landlords have done to create smoke-free housing policies, and found out in 2014 that at least 65% of landlords surveyed reported that they have at least one 100% smoke-free building. And that was an increase from 45% in 2011 in just 3 years. So it's a really exciting shift that's happening and to see those components taking place. Additional norm changes that have happened in Maine include the fact that we have seen a low-income housing tax credit program, smoke-free housing threshold requirement through Maine Housing. So that's their state qualified allocation plan. In 2014, they first made it a threshold requirement, meaning that buildings that were going to get that smoke-free housing funding, funding would have to have a smoke-free housing policy. Also in collaboration with Maine Housing, we've been able to create a smoke-free housing designation on Maine Housing Search. Maine Housing Search is the state's free landlord posting site for rentals and also a free registry that tenants can use to find housing in Maine. And there's a variety of different components that you can put in to make your property stand out. And one of those is putting a designation around whether or not the building has a smoke-free policy. And we've seen a large number of buildings that have done that. About over 30% of listings on Maine Housing Search now are highlighted as being in a 100% smoke-free building. Also, in 2011, Maine adopted a law around a secondhand smoke policy disclosure, requiring landlords to tell their tenants in writing prior to signing a new lease agreement what the smoke policy status of the building is. It doesn't require your building to be smoke-free, but it does require you to notify tenants of what the status of the building is, and both sign off on that before they enter into a lease agreement. This is a great opportunity to raise awareness of your policy, whatever the level of that, as well as can be an enforcement and compliance tool by making sure that everyone's coming in on the same page. So I talked a lot briefly there about some of the things that have happened in Maine regarding the smoke-free policies that have been put into place. And we're really excited to see that norm shift, the fact that these smoke-free housing policies are becoming the norm rather than the exception. But there's got to be a reason why, right? We want to make sure that we can really talk about the background as to what the case for smoke-free housing is and what has led to all of those policy changes. The really exciting thing about smoke-free housing policies is they provide a win-win opportunity for you and your tenants. There are key factors for adopting a policy that we'll go into a little bit more in detail, but we look at things such as health, cost savings, tenant preference, and safety. So there's some real good opportunities here to both have there be opportunities that are beneficial to the building owner, the property manager, as well as the tenant. This is a graphic from our recent smoke-free housing infographic showing, again, that comprehensive case for smoke-free housing. I'm really focusing on the fact that it is more expensive to turn over units where smoking is allowed, as well as reducing fire risk and having tenant preference for smoke-free housing, as well as making sure that we're reducing exposure to secondhand smoke. So this is really our quick way to show you that case for it. And this is a tool. We'll talk about more resources available at the end, but a tool that is available to you as a landlord to have sort of that talking points and case for it, and it's available electronically and as hard copies through the coalition. So when we talk about it, we've got that comprehensive case, but one of the big reasons that we've seen a lot of change and buy-in for smoke-free housing is that it really can save you a lot of money. There is a healthy cost savings related to adopting a smoke-free housing policy. You're putting a lot of reduced costs related to rehabbing a unit at turnover, related to being smoke-free and not allowing smoking in the building. We always like to say it's when it's a smoke-free policy, it's about the smoke, not the smoker. You're asking someone to smoke outside, not to have tenants not be able to smoke at all. But what you're doing by not allowing that smoking in the unit is potentially reducing costs 5 to 10 times for unit turnover because of different pieces related to painting, maintenance, needing to change out vent systems and different components. We'll talk about third-hand smoke in a minute, but that's really that residue that lingers on the walls or on appliances, and you're having to replace those or use special paints to get the odor and discoloration away, and that can be really expensive. Also, when we look at these components of cleaning and painting, this graphic is just showing us the actual raw cost for those pieces, but not even including the fact that there is a cost to having the maintenance staff in there or not being able to rent that unit. So there's really a great savings related to adopting a smoke-free housing policy. So as we mentioned, that studies are showing that the unit turnover can cost 5 to 10 times more when smoking is allowed in a unit. And we're now actually starting to see insurance companies awarding discounts for including smoke-free policies as part of your comprehensive fire casualty plan. And some of the reasons for these cost changes can be seen in the graphics at the bottom of this slide. things related to that residue that I mentioned on the left side, the fire danger, and one that really stresses me out here in the middle with the mattress burn, as well as the cigarette burns and things on carpets on the right. And this is showing us a variety of things that can lead to that increased cost. And by just changing your policy regarding smoking in the building, you can reduce these. We mentioned the fire safety and the inclusion of these products in fire safe casualty plans for your insurance company. But what we found out is that unfortunately, smoking is a leading cause of residential fire death. And the statement from the U.S. Fire Administration reports that while smoking-related fires account for only a small portion, or 2% of all residential building fires, they're a leading cause of civilian fire deaths, accounting for 14% of fire deaths in residential buildings. Oftentimes, this can be because someone's so close to the product when they're smoking that someone falls asleep in a unit, has difficulty getting out, and unfortunately, we've all heard the tragic stories regarding that. So a great way to reduce your fire risk is to create a smoke-free policy. And this is a statement from Maine's fire marshal in 2012, coming out to say that if people smoke outside only and extinguish their cigarette butts safely in water or sand, property owners' risk of fire will be reduced significantly, and they'd save thousands of dollars in turnover, and even more importantly, lives would be saved. So there's a great key to be able to create a safer building and reduce your risk of property damage by making it smoke-free. Related to the sort of good case, we're talking about, you know, financial savings, safety increases. A great thing is also it could create happier tenants. In that same survey where we reached out to landlords asking them about their current smoke-free policies, we also surveyed Maine multi-unit housing residents and asked about their preferences regarding smoke-free environments, and asking them, if all things being equal, would I choose to live in a smoke-free rental over a place that allows smoking? And in 2014, we found out that nearly 80%, or 77%, of tenants surveyed said they would prefer to live in a smoke-free environment. This included both smokers and non-smokers. So this is really telling you that the shift is happening and changing, and that your tenants are not going to balk at this policy change in the long run. We know that there might be some headaches at the beginning or discussion that's going to happen, but the vast majority of tenants are going to be really happy with your decision to go smoke-free. And that can be really related to the personal health effects that are connected to adopting smoke-free policies. We know from the U.S. Surgeon General that there's no risk-free level of exposure to secondhand smoke. And the secondhand smoke is the pieces that are coming off the burning end of a cigarette or being exhaled by a smoker. And what we've learned is that there's no way when separating smokers from non-smokers in a building that can't eliminate the harmful effects of secondhand smoke. That air can move between units in the building. So if someone in your neighboring unit is smoking, those toxins can be moving into your unit. We at the coalition, we get a lot of calls from tenants with concerns, especially if you have children or someone who might be elderly or have breathing conditions that have concerns about the exposure to secondhand smoke. And so by putting in a smoke-free policy and asking people to smoke outside and not within the building, you're protecting those people from secondhand smoke as well as protecting your investment in the building. I mentioned the term earlier, but want to come back to the issue of third-hand smoke. The term has actually only been around for a little over 5 years now, but it's one of those things that I think we all anecdotally knew about, and one of the groups that we at the coalition work with the most that are most aware of third-hand smoke is landlords. We're talking about that residual tobacco smoke contamination that remains after smoking has stopped. So think about that stale tobacco odor that remains when someone's not smoking in a room, but it has previously been happening. This image on the wall that's showing when we removed paintings and things that there's that sort of that residue that remained, and that's the tar and toxins from that was from the tobacco smoke that has landed on those surfaces. This is a lot of what the extreme costs come from, because it's cleaning up this piece. You have to wash those walls, having to use special paints, and being able to take that on can be a really tough thing. And it's pesky because it gets stuck in, whether it's in the filters or vents on your appliances and things, that it can really linger and cause some of those components. However, there also is a health issue associated with this. I'm going to talk about infants, children, and non-smoking adults can be at risk for tobacco-related health problems when they breathe the air or ingest materials that include this third-hand smoke. And it can be a frustrating piece because it builds up over time and resists normal cleaning. So by making sure that the building remains smoke-free, you're reducing that and removing that from the environment. So that's one of our sort of emerging awareness issues, and I'm going to turn it over to Meg to talk about some additional issues that we know.
Thank you, Sarah. So moving on to some emerging issues, we're starting with a definition from ASHRAE, which is the American Society of Heating, Refrigeration, and Air Conditioning Engineers, around environmental tobacco smoke. So Sarah had previously talked about the fact that separating non-smoking and smoking units in a building with air ventilation systems doesn't actually eliminate those health risks. So here's a statement from the group of people who are the certified engineers, saying that the only means of effectively eliminating the health risks associated with indoor exposure is to ban smoking entirely. And in 2015, they amended their statement, adding the emissions produced by electronic smoking devices, including e-cigarettes, and we'll talk in a few minutes about other products, and cannabis or marijuana, to that secondhand smoke definition. So they're saying the secondhand emissions from electronic nicotine delivery systems and marijuana do the exact same things that secondhand tobacco smoke does. So we'll start with marijuana and what we know, and we're talking specifically here in Maine. So Maine's Medical Use of Marijuana Act states that a landlord or business owner can prohibit the smoking of marijuana for medical purposes on their premise if you also prohibit all smoking. So if you already prohibit tobacco smoking in your apartment, you are allowed to say you cannot use medical marijuana in a smoked form also in your unit. Because we get a lot of calls from landlords saying, you know, what do I do about medical marijuana? So this is a statement from Maine statute that says this is what you're allowed to do. And these are the governing rules for the medical use of marijuana program in the state. In addition, a person may not smoke marijuana on any form of public transportation or in any public place. So this is an added emphasis saying, you know, you can prohibit it in your building if you're a smoke-free premise, but you're also saying is this person can't then go and sit out on their deck or their front step and smoke marijuana because that is considered a public place. So there are two additional helpful resources to land managers in Maine. One of them is national, from the Housing and Urban Development Memo regarding medical marijuana use in public housing authorities and through the Housing Choice Voucher Program. And then there is a memo from the Maine Attorney General's office around secondhand smoke and medical marijuana. And I would say if you have questions about these and can't seem to find them after a quick Google search, you know, call us or email us and we can point you in the right direction for finding these. So what else about marijuana? In June 2002, a panel of experts were brought together by the International Agency for Research on Cancer. So this is an agency of the World Health Organization, and they determined that secondhand marijuana smoke causes cancer. And this, additionally, in 2009, a report by scientists for California's Proposition 65 indicated that marijuana smoke and tobacco smoke share many characteristics regarding to chemical composition and toxicology activity. And at least 33 individual constituents presented in both marijuana smoke and tobacco smoke are Prop 65 carcinogens. So those are two very strong statements saying the secondhand marijuana smoke is as dangerous as that of secondhand tobacco smoke. And things to consider when thinking about smoke-free housing and marijuana is how you differentiate between medicinal use and recreational use. If it were to pass to be legal, or we know that people do it even though it is illegal. And you as a landlord, if you allow smoking and somebody is smoking marijuana, how do you know that it's medicinal use? Those are things that you need to think about and put into your policy as you work through these things. And we do have some tips on policy language that we'll get to at the end. So moving on to one of the other emerging issues that we get a lot of questions around are e-cigarettes or electronic nicotine delivery systems, also people call them vaporizers, vape pens, hookah pens, e-pens. So these are all battery-powered products that heat a liquid that contains nicotine, though sometimes the liquid says it is nicotine-free, and other chemicals. So the vapor released by these products can release nicotine and other cancer-causing chemicals, and these are things that we do know for a fact. So things to consider when you're looking at these products is sometimes they look like cigarettes and cigars, other times they look like pipes or pens or flashlights or these big box contraptions that people hang on to. But when they look like other products, so like the picture on the left here on the top, from far away, that looks like a traditional cigarette. So it's really hard for a person, me, if I were walking down the hall of a multi-unit housing building and saw somebody with that in their hand, I would probably assume that it's a regular cigarette and not the vapor product. So by excluding these type of products from a smoke-free policy can make it really hard for enforcement. And one thing to note, in the state of Maine, as of October 15th, 2015, coming up on a year now, e-cigarettes are included in the definition of smoking in Maine law in terms of public places. So these are not allowed to be used in public places where smoking was already prohibited. One other issue that we are starting to see more of in the housing population is hookah. Hookah is a water pipe used to smoke flavored tobacco, also called shisha, and it's cooled through the water. Hookah can also be used electronically through hookah pens or e-hookah. Very same health effects as smoking traditional cigarettes or cigars, increased risk of cancer, clogged arteries, heart disease, lung disease, complications during pregnancy. And there's also tends to be a social component to it. So it's not something that people are doing by themselves, so there's increased users while using hookah. And I'll get on the next slide, we have a little bit more information about these, but one interesting fact around hookah is a 1-hour hookah session contains 30 times more tar than a cigarette. So if you think back to that picture, 4 or 5 slides ago of where people are taking paintings or pictures off of the walls and you can see the white around, like the yellow and the white difference, that is caused by that remaining tar. So if you think about, there's even more of that in the air with hookah and what's exhaled by the user and what they are getting into their body. So there's some major health effects around hookah as well. So we here at the Breathe Easy Coalition have recently developed 2 new resources on these e-cigarettes and hookah. There are pictures here on the screen of these rack cards that we have. They are available on our website for download or viewing, or if you want printed copies, you can contact us. And that website is actually breatheeasymaine.org/resources-me. Or if you just go to breatheeasymaine.org and click the resources, you'll be able to find them there. So we've talked a lot about the case for smoke-free housing and why you should do it and all of these other emerging products. So now the how, how do you implement a smoke-free policy? So we can boil it down right here to 6 simple steps. We know that it is a lot of work here in these 6 steps, but it can actually be fairly easy to go through these steps. So step 1, make a plan. 2, adopt your policy language. 3, educate residents and staff. 4, amend your leases. 5, communicate the policy. And then 6, ongoing implementation and enforcement. And we're going to go through these. So making a plan. Things to consider as you're making a plan in terms of going smoke-free is, when do you want to have your policy take effect? Where will you restrict smoking? You know, is it going to be just inside? Are you going to have designated smoking area on your property? Or is your whole property going to be smoke-free? In Maine, you have the legal right to do any and all of these things. And that is totally up to you as the property owner. And other things to think about. Do you want to survey residents, or have you made your decision? Reviewing current for notification components. And the one biggest tip we have is, don't enter into these lease adoptions with any long-term grandfathering. So if you have existing tenants who are allowed to smoke, you know, the policy change goes into effect for everybody at the same time. Grandfathering just becomes this big challenge in terms of enforcement. So if your lease requires certain numbers of days, weeks, months, whatever it is, for notification of a change in policy, make sure that when you are adopting your smoke-free policy that you take that into consideration. So the first step is to develop the policy. We want you to make policy language clear and consistent with how your other policies are stated for your organization or within your lease. Make sure the policy is structured in a way that's enforceable. And if you don't really know where to start with this, we have template policy language on our website to help you assist in your policy development. And we will get more to that towards the end when we talk about other resources that are available. So what needs to be included in the policy? And these are the best practice pieces that we encourage landlords and property managers and owners to use, and it helps with the education piece that will come next. So the first piece of a policy component is the purpose. This is why. And it could be a few sentences. I mean, we can provide you 8 pages worth of information on this. If you wanted, you could give them this whole webinar. I wouldn't suggest that, but we would say, 1 or 2 sentences, this is why you're doing a smoke-free policy. The definition of the policy, so this is who it affects and what you're being asked to do. And this is the key where you need to be as specific as possible if you want to address emerging issues, include them in that definition. So this is, all tobacco products including, and you can list them out. We have that language. This is just X number of products. It's just smoking. It's including e-cigarettes. It's including marijuana. You name it. This is what your chance to be very specific in what you're defining. And then procedures. This is how the policy will be implemented, enforcement, and then ongoing support. And again, we have resources to be able to help you, build this part out. So a definition section is outlining what the policy covers, what locations it covers, who's responsible for complying. So here's some example language. Smoking is prohibited in any indoor area of the property, both private and common. The policy applies to all owners, tenants, guests, and service people. All smoking materials must be disposed of appropriately, whether in a trash can provided, minus that typo there, sorry about that. Smoking, and then here's the definition of smoking. It means inhaling, exhaling, burning, or carrying any lighted cigars, cigarette, electronic cigarette, marijuana, or other product in any manner or any form. This is as comprehensive as you can get it, and saying this is what's prohibited in the policy. And then communication. So communication is key. This is what will make your policy successful. And increase compliance. So sharing information in writing, in tenant meetings, if you're going to have those or hold them regularly, this will help get the message across. In addition, Sarah and myself are available to come to any tenant meetings if you want, to be able to bear the brunt of the questions from your tenants. Include it in upcoming newsletters, send out educational reminders, host meetings to answer questions. Be proactive in your communication around the policy will help long-term success. And then post signs. Signage is that ongoing communication and a consistent reminder of your policy to residents and their guests who will help support enforcement. You know, you can tell your tenants, and they all know, but what happens when they have somebody coming over to visit? If you don't have a sign up, they aren't going to know. And there's this picture over here on the right. This is actually a property in the state of Maine with some great signage that they got from us. We'll talk more about that in a few minutes. And then ongoing implementation and enforcement. Be proud of your smoke-free policy. You know, make the day your building goes smoke-free a celebration with a kickoff. It sets a positive tone, acts as a reminder for change, and be ready to enforce from day one. You know, there's growing pains of dealing with policy change, but stay consistent with your messaging. And additionally, we would say, you know, treat this policy like you do any of your other policies, whether, you know, it's prohibiting pets or X, Y, or Z, whatever it is. You know, treating this smoke-free policy the same as all of your others is also beneficial to you as a landlord or property manager, but also to your tenants. And I'll turn it back over to Sarah here to share with you some of the resources that are available to you to help with it.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Meg. That's one of the pieces as the coalition. Our role is really to make this policy change as easy as possible. The examples that Meg just shared and all of that language for policies are really based upon working with a number of landlords in Maine over the years on implementing these sort of policies. So how do we do that? What is available for you? As we mentioned, we're a grant-funded program, so we're able to provide everything that we do for free, which is really a nice benefit, and we hope that you can take advantage of it. So we work on making sure we're able to provide free materials, as Meg just highlighted really well about the fact that communication and awareness is key. Same as how we go down the street, if we don't see a speed limit sign, we can't, you know, how are we supposed to know what we're supposed to be doing? If somebody doesn't see the sign to know that this is a smoke-free area, how are they supposed to do that? So one of the things that we have is free signage. You see some examples of the language here on the slide. So that includes aluminum signs, window clings, reminder materials such as magnets and keychains for tenants. We also have sample policy language, those different examples of information of what to include, such as lease addendums, policy language, how to incorporate the disclosure law. All of that can be found on our website. We also have a number of fact sheets, and you saw some examples of the infographics and rack cards that we have. There are both ones that are made to support the landlord or maybe your staff, as well as ones that are made to be handouts as educational resources for tenants. With implementation and enforcement tips, timelines, and different key components there, as well as being able to do those components around technical assistance. So whether you have questions about adopting a policy, want to be connected to maybe a similar landlord who's done some work on this area, to be able to learn what it's really like in the field, or how to talk about it. As Meg mentioned, we can come out and do presentations on this and help with those changes. So those are a number of the things that we can do to help. Just some further examples here. We have that some on our website, smokefreeforme.org. I mentioned the free materials we have, so you can go right to the materials order form. That's hopefully a pretty straightforward way to go through and see the decals, magnets, keychains, signs that you can get. Also on the website, there's a lot of great information. We hope that you'll find useful everything from all of the different resources to having example information for enforcement or information about those marijuana laws that were mentioned. I'm hitting on those. Mentioned that we have infographics. You see some additional ones here on second and third-hand smoke. These are all made to be general public resources, so it could be handed out even to your tenants as a tool. Additionally, there are community resources to help you in this effort. we really do talk about the fact that smoke-free housing policies are about the smoke, not the smoker. But we know oftentimes it might be something that leads someone to want to quit. So it's good to have the resources for your tenants, just to make sure that we're giving them support in case they want to make a change. In Maine, we're lucky to have some great free resources like the Maine Tobacco Helpline. They provide free phone counseling, and if you don't have insurance coverage for it, they can provide free nicotine replacement therapy. So that's the patch, gum, or lozenge that can help someone deal with nicotine cravings when they're trying to quit or cut down. So there's a lot of great resources there. Through them, they also have an online site called the Quit Link that can be acted sort of a social support for quitting tobacco. So these are great resources to know about. So you can connect your tenants or oftentimes your staff people who might be affected by this policy change. Also, we like to see smoke-free housing policy as part of the comprehensive healthy housing approach. So we partner with the state of Maine in their efforts on healthy homes. So there's a great resource at maine.gov/healthyhomes where you can get additional information on other healthy housing efforts that might be nice to look at or be in combination with what you're doing around smoke-free housing, that oftentimes when you're making one change, it can be helpful to be thinking about those other components or to figure out how you can be fitting all this in and making a good case to support your tenants. Or, for example, if you're trying to incorporate the secondhand smoke policy disclosure law, that you're also up to date on all the other disclosures that exist. And so it's good to have that Healthy Homes website as a resource. We're also glad that we really think that the web-based resources are helpful, but also have the ways that you can connect to us on all of the electronic versions, but there's also by phone and different pieces. But here on the website, we've got our two sites, our specific smoke-free housing site, as well as our general BreatheEasyMaine.org site that has all of the Breathe Easy Coalition resources. Additionally, we have, we love the social media side of things, but it's a great way there to stay up to date on what's happening with webinars or trainings that we might be doing. The latest research, we oftentimes try to post those different components. As you'll see on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram on there, as well as our YouTube page is where you can find a lot of the archived webinars and trainings. So we even have some short video vignettes that include landlords who are talking about creating a smoke-free housing policy and about their process. So there can be some good videos and resources on there. So we hope that you can connect that way. Additionally, we do a quarterly smoke-free housing landlord newsletter. So you can sign up for that by contacting us or by going to the link on our either of the websites. But that's where Meg, who's our guru on those pieces, sends out all the latest information or enforcement ideas, different components. And so with that, we want to thank you guys for your attention on the webinar. We're going to open it up to questions, looking in some of the pieces that people have put in. So make sure you can throw those right into the question box, and we'll read them and be able to go over some of those. And also feel free, if you have additional questions, that you can email them or call our office on that. But we're sorry to read that the first question, unfortunately, was someone who had an issue with some of the being able to hear us. I'm sorry to hear that that was happening, but hopefully that got fixed. If not, please contact us, and again, the webinar has been recorded so that we'll be able to send out the link with the audio. So hopefully you can have stuck with us for that. The next question, which is a great one, is when I start one of my buildings as a non-smoking building, what kind of right do I have to implement the policy if the tenant doesn't comply? This is a great question, and actually one of the most common things that we get, because that's it's the scary part. We'll be, you know, very, very open about that. It's so much easier to say, okay, here's the case for doing smoke-free housing, and just go and implement, and there's going to be no issue. But we know that's not the case. The real key is in the details. Making sure when you're making your building smoke-free and you're getting people to sign lease language that states what the policy is, that you're following those components that Meg mentioned about putting everything in detail, making it very clear, putting your enforcement in there. It really depends on the particulars on what you allow or put in for enforcement as your general sort of rules. Are you, you know, to written warnings and different components, what you're putting in general. But there is an ability to put the sort of that teeth into your policy. And we encourage that right from the get-go, of being open and honest with tenants about what the expectation is. One of the keys of why we say put everything in writing is also that make sure that tenants sign off on that lease language, because they're acknowledging that they know that the policy was in place. They're not going to come back and say, well, I didn't know that it was smoke-free. Well, we've got it in writing that you agreed to abide by this policy. Asking them to do that piece, while it really is not, it is never our hope or what we want to have to see. We have seen Maine landlords be able to successfully uphold evictions based on smoking in a smoke-free building. So there is also a legal precedent set to support the landlord's ability to create a smoke-free building. The biggest key when we work with folks is making sure that you're recording every violation. Put it in writing. Every time that you talk to a tenant about the fact that they're not complying with the smoking policy, make sure you're giving them that in writing and you're keeping a copy of that, or almost a log. Because that's the biggest thing, is that you have that ability to put that in place. We've seen some landlords who have even put that every time you don't comply with the policy, there's a fine associated with it. It's the same as if they were going to ding you for if there's a the pet policy like Meg mentioned, or if there's a noise complaint. They're really changing that norm and making sure that it's understood from day one that it's not acceptable. I know those are some pretty broad answers and ideas, but really it comes down to what's working for your individual property, but making sure that if it's, you know, if you have a staff person who's on site, that they're getting, that they are recording what's happening, and that you put it into place, like how many warnings does someone get? Is it how many times before you have to move sort of up that chain of enforcement? That whatever your norm is really important. Also, if you're getting complaints from tenants, we will oftentimes hear from someone who's the neighbor of someone who might be violating a smoke-free housing policy. Ask your tenant to keep a log of that. Be writing that down so that you're building your case. It is something that you can enforce, you can have the teeth to it, but it really is necessary to work with your department or folks who might be, if you have an organization lawyer who's going over those policies, make sure you're putting everything in proper order so that you can get that covered. And if you have specific issues or things that pop up, feel free to contact us and we can talk about the specific example and give you more concrete pieces there.
Yep. So one of the other questions we received is, how do I request signs and or materials, and how long does it take? I know Sarah had talked about this just a few minutes ago, but it's always good to reiterate it. So you can request signs on our website, smokefreeforme.org. And typically we say, you'll actually, if you fill out that online form to request materials, you'll get an email with a copy. And then there it says, you know, you allow a few weeks for delivery. Typically, we are filling those orders every Friday. So for the most part, you know, if you fill out an order today, the likelihood of us putting it together and sending it out in the mail this Friday is pretty high. So you'll likely have it within a few days. The U.S. Postal Service is pretty quick when we're mailing things within the state of Maine. So, or if you're in the greater Portland area, we can always coordinate things for you to come and pick them up if you would like to have them faster than that. I'll let Sarah take on another question.
Yeah. So next one was, what would you recommend that's a reasonable period of time to grandfather current smokers? This is a great question. When putting that policy change into place, really like to be mindful of the fact that this is going to be a big deal for people. You're taking something that could be a behavior that someone has been doing for a long time. They're going to have to shift their behavior. They're going to have to get used to it, but also there's going to have to be that time for discussion. As Meg had mentioned in sort of the steps, that you want to make sure that you're looking at what your lease agreements say with tenants. Oftentimes it's 30 or 90 days that you have to give as a minimal notice before you're changing any policy. We usually like to say that you don't wait too long, because then it can create a lot of other issues. So usually oftentimes that finding something in that maybe giving people like a 6-month notice so they're getting an ability to make that change and get adjusted for it. Some of the keys oftentimes also depend on what time of year it is. We always suggest that while we love seeing smoke-free housing policies all the time, it's not a great idea to start on January 1 sometimes, because it gets cold here in Maine. And people don't necessarily, it's not a great success rate of getting people to go outside for the first time in January. So we see a lot of good changes in the summer, spring, and fall. So oftentimes letting people know ahead of time and putting that in place can be good. The reason I mentioned not too long of a period of time is it can water down your message. So if you say we're going to be doing this, so what are we now? We're in September of 2016. Well, in 2019 we're going smoke-free. You're going to have to change your behavior. Well, your people are not going to really sort of buy into it. You might get hyped up right now and get excited, and people are ready to make this change, and sort of that ability sort of dies down over time. So sitting somewhere usually in around that 6 to 9 month time frame can be great. If you have, oftentimes we see, if you have maybe more of an elderly complex or somewhere where you have tenants who have lived there for a really long time, so you're sitting at people who've maybe lived in their unit for 10 to 15 years, so you're knowing it's going to take some time to maybe have those tenant meetings, have some discussion, change all of the leases. Upwards of getting almost up to that year can be a fine thing, but you want to make sure you're making that full shift to being 100% smoke-free within that time frame. That you're letting people know early so they have that ability to move that on. The reason we say to not do unlimited grandfathering is, as we mentioned in the slide earlier, that it's really hard to tell sometimes what unit smoking is coming from if you allow smoking in some units and not in others. Then making sure that all units are smoke-free makes it much easier for enforcement. So having everyone transitioning around the same time is the best bet for your current tenants, and letting people know when they're moving in that their units might be smoke-free from day one, but that within a couple months everyone else is transitioning as well. Because where we know up to 65% of that air moves between units, including carrying that secondhand smoke, there's nothing really to enforce it to give that teeth to somebody who's maybe the new tenant if their next door neighbor's allowed to smoke. So again, that was a long way around of saying probably in that 6-month time frame is that good sweet spot for those. So the follow-up to some of the pieces regarding the enforcement pieces are, so you can evict a tenant for not complying, and saying, obviously with the stipulation that would be via a lawyer. Yes, so I always do my nice disclaimer that we are not legal professionals. We're coming at this from experience of partnering with folks. So I would definitely recommend any components when you're doing this to include your legal representation and to get that full insight. But yes, there have been evictions that have been upheld strictly for someone not complying with the smoking policy. That is happening in Maine in both market rate and has happened in subsidized housing. And so it's things that judges have upheld going through that legal piece. But really when we've seen those successful components, It's that there was a good policy language, as well as people were making sure that they were documenting everything. But you can evict a tenant for not complying with policies, including the smoking policy.
And then one final question, somebody had asked when the webinar will be sent out or posted online, and we will have that within, I guess, 1 to 2 weeks, knowing that we have a few big events coming up later this week and other things going on in our office. So we typically will have it posted on our YouTube site within a week or so, and then we'll send out the recording link to all of the people who had registered to attend the webinar as well.
Great. Thank you all so much for joining us and for these great questions. I want to wish you all the best of luck in your efforts and in addressing smoke-free policies, and please feel free to contact us at the Coalition if there's anything we can do to help. Thank you.